Hebrew one also.
Okay. So, good evening, everyone. Here we have in front of us two sheets, one in Hebrew, one in English. Everyone should have two sheets. Each of us should have two sheets, one in Hebrew and one in English, to be able to follow. It's once more good evening. The topic this evening is love, ahava. As the topic this evening is the topic of love, ahava in Hebrew, which is the basic driving force and creative force of the world. And in all of the array of interpersonal relationships that we have here listed on the chart in front of us, the common denominator here is love. As we have here 13 different levels of love, which are intended to reflect all of the possible relationships, human relationships that exist, all being motivated by love. The fact that the world was created with love, we derive from the first verse of the second account of the creation, which reads that these are the generations of the heavens and the earth, biyom hibaram, in the day that they were created. And that word bihibaram reads ba'avraham, that the world was created with the power of Abraham. As Abraham, the first patriarch, the first Jewish soul, is the archetype in Kabbalah and Chasidoth of love, Avraham Ohavi, or of loving kindness, chesed la'Avraham. Olam chesed yibaneh, the world was constructed and created with loving kindness, with chesed. Through the principle of Avraham, bihibaram bi'Avraham. Eile todot ha'shamayim v'ha'aretz bihibaram, b'yom asot Hashem Elokim eretz v'shamayim. Love is compared as a physical element to water, even though there is also a love like fire, a fiery, impassioned love that we'll speak of. In general, love corresponds to water, which flows and which also possesses a physical property of osmosis that makes things, especially living cells, cling together. That's why love represents the power of dveikut, of clinging together, just like osmosis, which is a property of water. Love also equals, the word love equals 13 itself. The fact that there are 13 here levels of love is due to this very gematria, the numerical equivalence of the word love, which is 13. The other basic word in the Hebrew language, which equals 13, is of course echad, one. The word for one itself, for the number one, equals 13. That's why, for instance, we all remember that at the end of the Seder, we sing Echad mi yodea, who knows one, and there's a progression of 13 stages. In those 13 stages of who knows one, who knows two, until we reach the epitome, which is who knows 13, the only two that directly refer to God are the first and the last. It's more the first, we probably all remember, who knows one. One is God, the creator of heavens and earth. Who knows two? Two are the two tablets. Three are the three patriarchs. Four are the four matriarchs. Five are the five books of the Torah, and so forth. Until we reach 13, who knows 13? 13 are the 13 principles of divine mercy, which are the properties of God himself. 12 are the 12 tribes. 11 are the 11 stars that Joseph saw in his dream that we read of this week in the Torah reading. Once more, each one of those numbers, each number has a meaning to it. The very fact that numbers are associated with Jewish content is also the foundation of chinuch, of education. That's really the reason that on the night of the Seder, which has to do with education of children, it's customary to say this piyut at the end, even though the piyut does not, this poem, this song does not mention at all the story of the Exodus of Pesach. But the reason that it's recited at the end of the Seder is because this is the foundation of Jewish education. The proper, what will become unconscious association of numbers with Jewish content. Whereas here it's conscious, but throughout one's life, if a Jew sees the number 3, so at some level of his consciousness, that 3 should ring a bell, either once more a conscious or an unconscious bell of the 3 patriarchs. Who knows 3? Who knows 4? But once more, in all of those 13 numbers, the only 2 that directly relate and apply to God are the first and the last. That Hashem is one, and He has 13 principles of mercy, which are also, of course, mercy is related to love. So this is the importance of the number 13, and how 13 is the number of ahava, of love, and also of echad. Meaning that through love we come to unity, to a consciousness of unity, and to an actual state of spiritual and even physical unity. The love between man and woman consummates in union. They cling to one another and they become one flesh, one body. Love is in order to become one and the same. Love of God is to become one with God. It's the attraction and the striving to become one. That's why ahava equals echad. And as we see here, we have 13 different levels of love. Now, we mentioned in one of the previous talks today that the 10 sfirot, in their expanded form, are actually 13 levels. Now, how this works, or how that's pictured, the 10 become 13, there are different models. There are basically 3 different models, one of which we have here in front of us in this chart of the 13 levels of love. Sometimes the 10 to become 13, 3 levels are added at the top, called 3 hidden or unconscious or superconscious heads of the crown. The crown is the superconscious of the soul. So when those 3 superconscious heads of the crown are added to the 10 conscious sfirot, levels of the soul, the 10 conscious are the 3 intellectual levels, chokhmah, binah, dat, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, and then the 7 emotional levels of chesed, gvura, love, and fear, and mercy, and confidence, and sincerity, and devotion or dedication, and humility. When the 3 and the 10, there are 3 intellectual faculties of the soul and 7 emotional faculties of the soul. When we add to those 10 conscious faculties of the soul, which are also the channels through which God created the world, the 10 supreme sfirot, when we add the 3 unconscious, superconscious heads of the crown, which are faith and pleasure and will, then we arrive at 13. Sometimes the 13 are arrived at in an opposite manner. That in addition to the 10 conscious levels of the soul, there are 3 garments of the soul: thought, speech, and action. 3 outer expressions of the soul. Now, the thought is actually expression of the soul to itself, to myself. But it's a garment of the soul. I think about what I am emotionally aroused towards and of what my mind perceives. And then speech and action are the expression of the soul outwardly to the other, to the world. But here we have a third model of how the 10 become 13. And here the model is that we have, as always, 9 in the middle, because there are 3 intellectual powers, as we said before. And then in the 7 emotional powers, there are 2 groups of 3. The 3, 3, and 1. But first there are 2 groups of 3. One are the inner emotions of the heart, which are love, fear, and mercy. Mercy, as we said before, relates to love, but it's not identical with love. Mercy is the property of Jacob, of Yaakov Avinu, whereas love is the property of Abraham Avinu. Mercy is empathy, is the ability to feel the suffering and the situation of the other individual, to identify with him, and thereby to be actually forced in a certain way. It's a inner psychological coercion that you must help and be merciful and do good with this person. It's not just a love from above of the other individual, as is the first of these sfirot, which is chesed, loving kindness. So once more, the 3 basic emotive properties of the heart are the love and the fear and the mercy, which correspond to our 3 patriarchs, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Abraham is love, and Yitzchak is fear, pachad Yitzchak, fear of heaven, and Yaakov Avinu is mercy, empathy. Then come another 3 emotions, but these are not the inner emotions of the heart. These are native or innate emotions which manifest themselves in a functional manner. When a person begins to act, these emotions come to play. And those are called Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, which are security and confidence and victory, the drive to succeed and to overcome all obstacles. And then Hod is the sincerity of being always in tune and in focused what is one's goal, and moving always towards that goal. That's called Hod. Once more, it's a functional emotion. And the last of these 3 functional emotions is Yesod. Yesod is the sense of contact already with the goal. The foundation is that you're in touch and that you actually are aroused with the pleasure of being in touch and in contact with the goal. It's called the sense of verification of truth, the inherent pleasure in making a promise come true. Making an oath, if the soul has made a vow, an inner vow, without expressing from the lips, but the soul has decided to do something, the pleasure of making it come true, of making it happen, that is the emotive experience of Yesod, of the foundation. It's called Emet, truth, the truth of verification. It's also the sense of self-fulfillment, a very important concept, especially nowadays. The drive to self-fulfillment, or the sense of being fulfilled oneself. Once more, making an inner promise come true. That is the property of Yosef, of whom we read in this week's Torah reading. Those are three emotive powers. So actually we have here three triplets. Those are three functional emotive powers. The Netzach and the Hod and the Yesod. So we have three intellectual powers. Wisdom is the initial flash of insight. Understanding is the ability to analyze that insight and to integrate that insight, to understand it, to comprehend it in all of its breadth and wealth. And Dat is the ability to always retain perception and concentration and contact, spiritual contact with the truth that understanding entails. So Dat is knowledge. Knowledge means always remaining in touch. It has to do with the ability to concentrate, but not just to concentrate, to know that the soul knows the truth of that intellectual concept. These are called wisdom. Wisdom is the flash, and understanding is the analysis and the integration intellectually, and the Dat is the continual being in touch with the concept, with the truth. Those are the three intellectual levels. So we have three intellectual levels, three emotive levels of the heart, and then three functional emotions. So we have 9. Those are always the 9 inner levels of the soul. Then we have our superconscious, the crown, and we have the last of the 7, which is called Malchut, the kingdom, which is the way the soul reflects itself on external reality. So often, in the very highest level of the crown and the very lowest level of the Malchut, they split into 2 dimensions. That the 2 dimensions are called straight light and returning light, or reflecting light. Straight and reflecting. That at these 2 levels, there are 2 dimensions of down and up, of straight light descending and reflecting light ascending. And so if there are 2 levels of the crown and 2 levels of the Malchut, together with the 9 levels in between, so once more we receive 13 different levels. Once more, this is a third model of how 10 becomes 13. And this is the model which is present here in front of us, the model of understanding the 13 loves of the soul that we'll now continue to explain. So first we just explained the structure of the chart that we have in front of us. The soul has its 10 powers, which correspond to the 10 sfirot, through which God created the world. But those 10, in 3 different ways, are modeled to, or enlarged, to become 13. And this is one of the 3, and this is the one that relates to love. Right, so before we said that love is actually one of the 13. Because love is chesed. It's the first of the properties of the heart. But now we're saying that this first of the properties of the heart, which is the attribute of Abraham, of Avraham Avinu, is as well, or even primarily, an all-inclusive concept. It's not just one particular concept amongst 13, but it includes all of the 13. But there's some force which is making all of these 13 work and develop and work together, with togetherness, with oneness, which is the love which is inherent in all of them. Once more, there's love in wisdom. And actually, I could say that all, just like any hologram, Kabbalah is always based upon holograms, every detail must be able to reflect all of the details. So I could theoretically say that just like there is love in everything, there is wisdom in everything, and there is fear in everything. And there is malchut in everything, and each one is in each one. But there is nonetheless something unique about love. That not just that each one is inter-included in each one. Once more, that's a general concept in Kabbalah, that there is inter-inclusion. That's called the hologram principle. That every part must reflect all of the parts of the whole. But more so in respect to love itself, love is the force behind all of the other forces of the soul, which makes them all grow and develop. Without love, they wouldn't come into being. Once more, without love, nothing would be. Just like without love of man and woman, there would be no children in the world. Nothing would happen. There would be no procreation. In the same way, in the soul itself, without love, not just that love is included in everything else, but without love, nothing would be. Even faith, which is the very, very highest of the three heads of the Keter, would not reveal itself would it not come from love. Once more, everything would remain potential and never become actual would it not be for love. So once more, love first makes things actual and then goes on to bring things together, to connect and unite things, and ultimately to reach true oneness, as we said before. Right, so we have here 13 powers of the soul, but now our objective in the meditation this evening is to see that each one is a manifestation of love. That wisdom is a manifestation of love, and understanding is a manifestation of love, and knowledge is a manifestation of love, and each one of all of the 13 are a manifestation of what previously was just one of the 13. Was the first of the emotions, of the primary emotions of the heart. Right now, so before we go on to enumerate them one by one, we have to explain another introductory concept, which is that in interpersonal relationships in general, which as we'll see are all love relationships, there are three basic relations between the two loving souls. As love is always two. There are two that are loving one another, and through loving one another, the two become one. That's why the Torah begins with the letter Bet, which is two. That everything begins in its relation. When we envision the world, we don't first see one. We first see two, like heavens and earth. Breshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz, or male and female. That which we observe throughout reality, throughout creation, is a dual principle. The objective of our service of God is to those two to unite and become one. That's why the Ten Commandments, Aseret HaDibrot, which is the giving of the Torah, begins with the letter Aleph, Anochi, which is one. So the story of creation begins with Bet, two. But Aseret HaDibrot, the Torah begins with one. But that was only given thousands of years later. And that first, also in our own experience, we first observe a creation which is based on a dual principle. But through love, those two become one. V'hayu lebasar echad. All right, so now in two becoming one, there are three basic ways. Three basic states of relationship. And the acronym to remember them is Kemach. Before it was mentioned here, the famous statement in Pirkei Avot, Im en Kemach in Torah, if there's no flour, there's no Torah. Im en Torah in Kemach. One of the meanings of Kemach is that flour is not just the support necessary in order to that Torah institutions prosper and exist, but that Kemach is an acronym for three words which are Kinyan and Mesirah and chibur. These are three words that are not here listed on the sheet. Kinyan is possession. Mesirah is giving over. A flow, a channel. And chibur is friendship or connection, togetherness. Once more, kinyan, mesirah, chibur. Possession, a giving process, or a friendship, connecting relation. Meaning that once more, love can be based on one of three principles. Either the love is a reflection of possession. In possession, there is a possessor and a possessed. The possessor loves his possession just in virtue of the fact that it is his possession. And in the same way, this is called Or Choser, the returning light, the possessed, a true possessed, not an obsessive possessed, but a true desirous possessed, loves his possessor. Then the next form or model of a love relationship is based upon the principle of mesirah, of a giver and a taker, or a mashpia and a mekabel. That one is giving and the other is receiving. It's not because one belongs to the other. Once more, even in marriage, all of these three principles come to play in marriage. But primarily the male-female relationship of man and woman begins by being a giver and receiving relationship. But according to Jewish law, in order to make that holy, it must also have possession to it. It must be belonging. That's what Kiddushin does. That Kiddushin makes marriage a state not just of flow, of giving and receiving, but turns it into a state of belonging. That the wife belongs to the husband, and in the same way the husband also belongs to the wife. In halakha, just as apparent that the wife belongs to the husband, the possession of the husband. There's a famous story of the Baal HaGeulah of tomorrow, the Alter Rebbe, that once he heard his wife, his own wife, the author of the Tanya, once he heard his wife talking to her friends, her women friends, and she said, "Mine rezogt," that mine says like this. And she referred to her husband as mine, my possession. So when the husband heard that, he reached a tremendous state of ecstasy. That just being married, I become her, I belong to her. And he understood how deep that means just by one mitzvah. One mitzvah that we perform. Not only do we belong to God, but the husband-wife relationship is like a soul-God relationship. So by every mitzvah means connection. It's like marriage. Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav. Every mitzvah in the Torah is kiddushin, is like giving a ring. The mitzvah that Hashem gives us like the chatan, the groom giving a ring to the bride. Every single mitzvah, not only do we become possessed to God, but God becomes possessed to us. Not only do we belong to God, but God belongs to us in virtue of the very fact that He is sanctifying us as husband to wife. So once more, the Torah requires that not only the love of husband and wife is one of a mesirah nature, which is the natural love between male and female, but it also has to become holy in virtue of its being a actual possession of one belonging to the other. There's something deeper about belonging to one another than just giving and receiving. Even giving and receiving for the sake of having children, of procreation, and actually becoming one physically and spiritually. Now there's a third principle behind love relationships, which is called chibur. Once more, the acronym is KEMACH. of which we say if we don't have all of these three principles, then we can't have the Torah, because the Torah requires all of these principles of love. This is the flower of the Torah. The kinyan and the mesirah and the chibur. What does chibur mean? Chibur means the union of two equals. Just the friendship, the companionship, not because one is rich and the other is poor, meaning that one is giving and the other is receiving. And not because one belongs to the other. Just the very fact that we're equals, that in itself is a reason to become friends, to become connected to one another, companions with one another. That is also reflected in an ideal Jewish marriage. Eshet chaver chaver. A true marriage is one also of a level of friendship. What's for friendship in the sense of being equals, like partners. The sense of being at the same level, the same stature. In Kabbalah it's called shavin bekomatan. When there is a flow of, which is called mesirah, of giving and taking, the giver is always higher. This is the spiritual idiom in Kabbalah. His stature is higher than the receiver. That's why even in general the physical difference between man and woman is represented in height in general. That the man is a little bit physically higher than the woman. But it says that when Mashiach will come, man and woman will be equal of stature. Shavin bekomatan. So that level of shavin bekomatan is no longer then, the emphasis is not so much on the giving and the taking, it's just the love because of the fact that we are truly equal. And truly equal means that we have the same common desire. Truly equal means that the skulls meet. The skull is the will, but the top of the head is the same, at the same height. That's the idiom in Kabbalah of being equal, that the skulls meet. Once more, that means in the idiom of Kabbalah that the will is one. That we both want the same thing, in a very simple language. So the love that is based upon that principle of a common will is called chibur. The love between equals. So once more, there are these three basic principles of love, which are kinyan. In general, kinyan, as we'll see here, kinyan is the level of the keter and the malchut in our chart in front of us. And it has these two directions, which are like two directions of light within one essence, one single entity. That there is the direct straight light and the returning reflected light. But it's from whole to part. When there's a possession relationship, the whole possesses the part. But the part is part of the whole. And in the expression of the Baal Shem Tov, when you grasp, as it were, a part of an essence, you think that you only have the part in your hand, but you actually possess the whole. Because the part and the whole are ultimately one and the same. It just appears that the part is only a part of the whole. But if you grasp a part of an essence, you can't cut the part from the whole. The part is the whole. Once more, this is the experience of true possession. That in a certain way, the whole is infinite and the part is finite. So the difference between the whole and the part apparently is even much, much greater than a giver and a receiver. The concept of giving and receiving. Because in giving and receiving is just a relative difference of stature, of height. That the giver must be a little bit higher than the receiver in order to make this cycle, this process of giving, go. But it's not an infinite difference. In possession, there is an apparent infinite difference, like the difference between infinity and finitude, which it itself justifies possession. Because why should one be totally possessed if not that the possessor is infinite relative to myself? But on the other hand, the very opposite is true. That just as possession implies infinity and finitude, which are infinitely removed one from the other, possession also implies that the part is ultimately the whole. That at some deep, deep level, the ultimate level, there's absolutely no difference between the two. Or as we said before, that the possessed is also the possessor. That just like the possessor possesses the possessed, so does the possessed possess the possessor. Minor zogt. All right, so that concept of possession, that is what is reflected in the relation between God and the soul, and in the physical relation of king to subject, which are the two levels here of Keter and Malchut. It's more only in Keter and Malchut we have a pure example of love based upon the principle of possession. Because at the level of Keter, once more, the God who is the infinite one loves his part. The Jewish soul is called a part of God, an actual part of God. Chelek Elokam Imam Mamash. And it's clear that the part is possessed by the whole. But just as God loves, as the whole loves the part, so does the part love the whole. Now at the very lowest level, in Malchut, that dual relationship becomes the love between king and subject and king, which is also a love which is purely based upon possession. And we said that in marriage we have this also reflected. This is the kiddushin of marriage. But nonetheless, the simple initial love of marriage, or love between man and woman, a husband and wife, is based upon the Mesirah principle. Now the Mesirah principle, which is that love is due to the fact that there is a giver and a receiver. And of course, even though we said that the giver is of must be higher in height than the receiver in order to make this work, but it's also true that there is a flow. Meaning that definitely the giver also realizes that through giving, he receives. I mean, there is definitely a flow. It's not just a one-way road of giving and receiving. It says more. There's a famous expression in the Gemara and the Talmud, that more than the Balabayit, the rich man, gives the poor man, does the poor man give the rich man back, spiritually, and even ultimately even physically. He'll get it back more and more. So there's definitely a feedback. In every giving and receiving relation, there's a feedback. And that's conscious, not unconscious. It's definitely conscious. Now, whenever we have this love relationship based upon giving and receiving, called mashpil mekabel, that in the terminology of Kabbalah is called left and right and left. The very definition of the concepts of right and left, there's a right line, the right hand and the left hand, and right foot and left foot in the body. The concepts of right and left are giver and receiver. So insofar as male-female is right and left, the male is on the right and the female is on the left. Now we said that love in general is water. But since in Kabbalah water is on the right, it means that that's primarily the male, the giver aspect of love. Whereas the female receiver aspect of love is more of one of love like fire. Even though deep down, since it's love, it has water in it, or it's based upon water. But as it says, even there's an explicit expression in Sefer Yetzirah, the first book of Kabbalah, the book of formation, that says, Esh mimayim, that fire itself derives from water. The love, which means that love like fire derives from an initial state of love, which is like water. That's, once more, this is the love of right and left. The middle line, once more, in the structure of the Sfirot, we have the top and the bottom, and then three lines, right, left, and middle. Whenever there is a right-left relationship, that's a giver-receiver relationship. The middle line is the line of chibur, the concept of equality, of love being based on the fact that we're both equals in a certain context. So all the way down the middle line of the Sfirot, we have this third principle of love in play, which is love based upon chibur. Right, so now we can look at the whole chart and see how it works. Actually, in short, we explained the top and the bottom. That the love from God, the love of God to Israel, and the love of Israel to God is the love at the level of Keter here, which is a super personal relationship, because it's the only place we have here explicitly God, infinity, in our picture. And it's based upon the principle, the ultimate principle of kinyan. Kinyan means possession, being one, belonging, absolutely belonging and being one with one another. And that is reflected at the very lowest level, which is malchut, which is the love of king to subjects, or the love of master to servant, and from below up, the love of subjects to king. Now, in the three middle categories of the intellectual powers and the primary emotional powers and the innate functional emotions of the soul, that each one is a triplet, there is right and left and middle. Once more, middle is the equals at that level. So now we can very clearly see what is happening here. The motivating love, which actually creates wisdom, as we said before, that love is what brings the potential of each sphira into actuality. So the love inherent in wisdom is the love of teacher to student, of Rav leTalmid, meaning the love of teacher to student is a giving relationship, a love based upon giving. Giving what? Giving intellect, wisdom. The corresponding love, which is the love of the Talmid Chacham, in the Kabbalah we find that wisdom is called Chacham, and Binah, understanding, is called Talmid Chacham, an idiom which is very, very common in the Talmud. The Talmid Chacham is the pupil of the Chacham, the student of the Chacham, he who receives from the Chacham. So the love of student to teacher is the love inherent in Binah, in understanding. Now what about the love of Dat, which is in the middle, of knowledge? So that is the love of equals at this level. What does equals mean? The students of one teacher. The Arizal said in his generation over 400 years ago that love which is most crucial to the coming of Mashiach, and because it's not fulfilled, Mashiach doesn't come, is dibuk chaverim. Now, this love, as we see in the Hebrew chart, is called dibuk chaverim, the clinging together of students whose common denominator is that they are all students of the same Rabbi, say all Hasidim of the Rabbi. So the Arizal already said that the deepest sin or even perversion of the generation is that the common students do not unite because of the inspiration of all of us being one and equal in virtue of our common Rebbe. That's called dibuk chaverim. So once more, it wasn't that there was a lack of love of Rebbe to the Rebbe to the students, or of the students of the Rebbe. The basic lack of love was in the middle line. which is the students to one another because we're all equals in this sense. That's called the love, which is at the level of da'at. Then we come to the emotional. We're just now going to do it in short. To the emotional level of the soul. The primary emotions. The primary emotion of love on the right is that of man to woman, or of husband to wife. And the primary emotion of love, then this is actual emotive love, that one feels the heart beating. The primary emotion on the left is that of woman to man, or of wife to husband. Now what is the emotion in the middle? At that level. So that is the love between Jews in general. That love between Jews in general is taken to be as the love of wives, of many wives possessing a common husband. Which is also a very, very deep and important concept in the Torah. The fact that the love of Israel, the love between friends, ahavat re'im, the love between friends is at this level of emotion is one of the foundations of the Baal Shem Tov of Hasidus that we also mentioned before. They said that a Jew, in his love of a fellow Jew, it has to be not just an innate love like between even brothers and sisters, as we'll come to presently, but it has to be a strong emotional love that I love you so much that I want to go and hug and kiss you. Because of actual emotion. Or the Jews should always be, either they're actually doing it or they would like to do it. They actually love their fellow Jews so much that they would like to go and hug and kiss them. That's called an actual, strong, emotional love in the heart. A warm, a hot love. A hot water. A hot water love. It's both water and fire. A hot mikveh. It's one of the takanot of the Alter Rabbi, the Bagu of tomorrow. And a hot mikveh love of one's fellow Jew. Right, so this is called ahavat re'im. That's at the middle level of the heart. This is not the nature of the love between students. That which the Arizal said. Once more, the one who most spoke about the love here at the level of da'at, which means amongst students of a common teacher, is the Arizal. The one who most addressed the love here at the level of Tiferet, which is amongst companions, with just fellow Jews, like a Hasidic of Habrengen getting together, a gathering getting together, and loving one another. That's the Baal Shem Tov. Emphasize that. Once more, the emphasis here of the level of Da'at was most emphasized by the Ari. And here at the level of love, once more, they emphasize the one in the middle line. The love which is based upon unity, not just because one is giving and the other is receiving, just because we're one. We're at the same level. So the Baal Shem Tov emphasized that type of love in Tiferet, which is called ahavat re'im, bichlal. Now we come to the third triplet, which are the innate emotions, or the functional emotions of Netzach Hod Yesod. These are the innate loves which appear and are manifest in a family situation. Once more, if the statures are of different height, then that means the generation gap. That a previous older generation is higher, is above a lower subsequent generation. Meaning that the father obviously is the giver and the child is the receiver. So the love of parents to children appears on the right, which is Netzach. And the love of children to parents appears on the left, which is Hod. And the love of equals appears in the middle, which is the love between the siblings. The love between the brothers and the sisters, because we are common children. We are equal in virtue of the fact that we are all children of the same parents. Now that point of Yesod, the foundation, is the topic of this week's Torah reading. And has to do with Joseph. Joseph is that soul that represents in Kabbalah, is the archetype of Yesod, of this Sphira. And the blemish and the sin, and due to that sin, our people, our forefathers, and the whole people went into exile. And maybe all of the bad things that have happened to the Jewish people in all of our history up until the present day, mamish, is due to that sin, which is the hatred of the brothers to Joseph. The jealousy, the hatred was due to jealousy of the brothers to Joseph. Meaning the blemish of the love at the innate level of what is intended to be commons, and equals, which are brothers, and because of apparent inequality, really because of a sense of inequality and injustice, that one was preferred over the others, there was developed at that crucial point, which is called Yesod, the Brit, that is the covenant point, the Ot Brit Kodesh. At that point, which is maybe the most sensitive point in the body, and likewise in the soul, this blemish of the hatred between brothers aroused, and that is what we are still hurting and suffering up until this very day. Because that's the blemish of Ahavat Achim, which is Yosef. So that was emphasized throughout the generations, from Yosef on. Actually, the very first hatred in the whole Torah is even before Yosef. That's between Cain and Hevel, the first murder in the Torah. The first murder in the Torah is a murder of brother to brother. And then we find repeatedly throughout the Torah the difficulty at this level, at the level of siblings, which is once more equal, the love which should be because of equality at the innate level of the soul. And once more we said that this level of the soul in general of Yesod has to do with the sense and even the pleasure entailed in self-fulfillment. Meaning that if there is hatred at this level and not love at this level of Yesod, it's due to a lack, an apparent lack of self-fulfillment. As the one brother is hindering the other brother from achieving his own self-fulfillment in life. And that produces a certain hatred, and again, that is the sin which we maybe most suffer. So we can say that the reason for our exile is the lack of love at this level, at the innate level, of the middle line of the innate level, which is the love based upon chibur at this innate level of the soul. Whereas that love which would bring the redemption, would take us out of exile, is not just the fixing, the rectification of that love, but it's reaching the highest love in the middle line, which is the dibuk chaverim, the common students of a Rabbi. And what the Baal Shem Tov said was, it said the middle. Apparently, in order to achieve and to ascend from Yesod to Dat, it's through the means of Tiferet. And Tiferet, the middle of the emotional levels of the soul, is simply this warm love of one's fellow Jew. Warm, emotional, hugging and kissing love of one's fellow Jew. All right, so now in very short, we've explained the three principles behind love, which are, the acronym once more is Kemach, Im En Kemach En Torah Kinyan and Mesiran Chibur. And we explained how it works here in the soul, and how each one of the Sfirot has its love. Now we'll just conclude with looking at the column here on the left, that the two loves which reflect the principle of kinyan, of possession, are called essential loves. Why? Because as we said before, possession is an essential property. So as the whole possesses the part. But for instance, let's say one word about the king subject level of love. Apparently there, the part is the furthest removed from the whole. The subject is very, very far away from the king, even though the king possesses, just like a master possesses his servant, a slave, but it says that a subject cannot be a close soul to the king, to the master. It can't, a king cannot be a king over children. He can't even be a king over officers. He has to be a king over far away people to be a king. En melech belo am. A people, the very word people itself, as taught in Tanya, implies a state which is very far removed from the melech. And without that state of person, of am, there can't be a king. On the other hand, there's an absolutely seemingly contradictory statement which says, Eved melech melech. That the slave of the king, the subject of the king, ultimately is the king himself. So once more, a total paradox. And on the one hand, the subject is way farther removed than a student in relation to a teacher, or definitely a wife in relation to a husband, or a child in relation to a father, or to a mother. And on the other hand, there's something about being a true subject, this true voluntary possession. Malchuto v'ratzon kiblu alehem. As we said before, possession, true possession is voluntary, is a choice. And there's something about the voluntary true possession that ultimately makes the two, however far removed, and it's the God and the soul, the being far removed from one another just because God is infinite and the soul is one spark. It's a spark of the infinite light. But there's something about the soul that you can see, you can sense that it's divine. A king and a subject appears that the distance is an external, a total distance. That there's absolutely no relation one between the other. Nonetheless, it says that a subject ultimately is not just close to the king, he is the king. Because what that means is very difficult to understand, but Eved Melech Melech. The subject, if he is truly possessed by the king, he himself is an extension of the king. Because once more, there's no king without the subject, so the subject is the king. Right, so these loves, these two which are the highest and the lowest, the Keter and the Malchut, are the essential loves. Which means that basically there are two states of love of God. The infinite love of God is at Keter, and the finite-based love of God. As in Chassidut, in Kabbalah and Chassidut, we're taught that in the love of God itself there are two levels. In our love of God, either an infinite, all-encompassing love of God that is based upon a consciousness of transcendence, of God's transcendence. That's called Ahava Rabbah, or a love of God based upon a consciousness of God's immanence. God's immanence in relation to his transcendence is finite, relatively finite. Once more, there is a love of God which is based upon God's immanence. And that love is not just the way I love him, but it's also the way he loves me, as it were. And there is a love of God based upon God's transcendence. God's immanence means the way that he relates as though he himself relates to the world. So just as the world is finite, it means his relation or his light that shines and emanates into the world also is relatively, as it were, finite. Confined within the world, immanent within the world. So at the level of God's immanence, there is a love of his creations and the love of the creations to him. That is God as king of the world, Melech HaOlam. And that is reflected in the love of king to subject. Then there is a God as transcendent of all of creation, as though having no relation to finite creation. To experience love at that level, the soul has to experience itself also as being existent prior to creation. And even prior to the thought of creation, to the intention, to the will of creation. That is called the infinite love of the soul, the soul itself. Because the soul is a spark of God prior even to the will of God to create, as it were. Once more, that love of transcendence is the essence of the love here at the level of Keter. And the love of God, which is an essential love, based upon his immanence in the world, is what is behind the love of king to subject and of subject to king. Now, the love of teacher to student and a student to teacher, and also the love of the students one to the other, of the equals, is all due to the love of the Torah. There's some basic love that is behind all of those three. That is motivating all of those three. And the basic love that's motivating all of the three at the level of the mind is the love of the Torah. So because of the love of the Torah, there is love of teacher to student, and of student to teacher, and of the students one to the other. Dibuk Havirim. Then there is a love which motivates the love of man to woman, and of woman to man, and of friends. And that in general is the love of Israel. As it says in even before the sin of Cain and Hevel, that one brother killed the other brother. So it was the first sin of Adam and Eve. And according to the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, in the Chumash, the sin of Adam and Eve was based on a lack of true love between the two of them. I mean, of love of husband to wife and wife to husband. It's very important to see the Or HaChaim HaKadosh. I mean that the first sin was a sin at the level of the emotional love between husband and wife, which is the origin of all of the love of Israel. And that's why it says also that the temple was destroyed because of lack of love, of Ahavat Yisrael, because of Sinat Chinam. So that love, and all of the love of husband to wife and wife to husband, and between friends, is all called Ahavat Yisrael, loving Israel. Now the most interesting thing here is that love, if there's an all-inclusive love which motivates the love within the family, the love between parents and children, and between children and parents, and the love between siblings, between brothers and sisters, that is the love of the land of Israel. Once more, this may be the most interesting point in this whole chart. But it's very clear that the love behind, or the love that motivates the relation between the teacher and the students is the Torah. And the love which motivates man and woman and friends is Israel. But what's most interesting here is that primary love which motivates the love in the family situation is the land. Why so? Because the land represents the continuity of the Jewish people. A very important, maybe the most important concept that nowadays Jewish community and communities are concerned and talk about. Jewish continuity. The love, it's easy, we might think that the continuity of the Jewish people depends upon the Torah. That's also certainly true. But it says that the anchor of Jewish continuity, or the physical manifestation of Jewish continuity, is the land. It says, Dor holech, where do we derive this from? Dor holech v'dor ba, v'ha'aretz lo'olam omedet. The generation comes and generation goes is the beginning of Ecclesiastics of Kohelet. It begins, the generation comes and generation goes, but the earth exists forever. And this is a simple pasuk, and the meaning of that pasuk of Dor holech v'dor ba v'ha'aretz olam kayemet is that factor which creates continuity from generation to generation, even though the generations are coming and going, the common denominator, which is actually the thing that the father is giving the child. We said that father-child is a giving and receiving love. What does the father actually give the child? And what does the child inherit from the father? What do we find about even the 5 daughters of Tzlofchad in the Torah? What was their relation to the Torah, to their father? The relation to the father was the inheritance of the land. Once more, that thing which connects the generations physically, and al pi pshat, is the inheritance of the land. If one forgets about our land that belongs to us and that we give from generation to generation, then one can forget about true continuity within the family in the context of the people and the innate level of the soul itself. So once more, the love of the land is what makes the netzach and the hod and the yesod work at all levels of the soul. Before, in a previous talk, you were talking about the immune system in the body, which has to do with the level of hod. Now we're saying that hod has to do with the love of children to parents. So if for instance, if most of the diseases nowadays, Hashem Yishmor, are malfunctionings of the immune system, that means that there is a pigam, a blemish, at this innate level of children to fathers. That's because all of the various models that are created according to the Kabbalah all correspond to one another and all relate to one another. And what is behind that, the problem with that, is because the love of the land itself was not just like if the land is actually there to give over from generation to generation, that's the linkage between the generations. But the real thing that the father gives the son, and the son gives back, reflects back the feedback from the son to the father, is that if there's not actually the land to give, at least the love of the land to give. And the love of the Torah, that's the function of the Rabbi. The Torah says that a father should also teach his children, is responsible to teach his children Torah. But then the father, if he does it himself, then he becomes the Rebbe. And if he doesn't do it himself, he gives his child to a Rebbe to teach. But what is only that thing that the father has to give the children? The father has to give the children the love of the land. And once more, the fact that the children love the father is because they've received from the father the love of the land. And once more, if there isn't love between the siblings, between the brothers and the sisters, there's also a problem with the love of Eretz Yisrael. Or there's some blemish behind hatred within a family that there was not conveyed at this innate level of the soul the love of Eretz Yisrael. Once more, we'll conclude with this point because this may be the most potent point here in the whole discussion. That just to summarize this last thing, which is the column here on the left, the 2 loves, which are actually 4, the 2 which are 4 at the level of Keter and Malchut, the Or Yashar and the Or Choser of the Keter, and the Or Yashar and the Or Choser of the Malchut, are essential loves which primarily are based upon love of God. That even the love of king to servant is a manifestation of the love of God, just of the love of God in his immanent level. All of the loves, the intellectual loves, are due to the love of the Torah. And all of the primary emotional loves are due to the love of Israel. But the tikkun of the love within the family is deep down dependent upon the love of the land of Israel. And this is actually the purpose, as we see explicitly throughout the Torah, that the purpose of the land of Israel is that power which keeps the family together and keeps the family directed to its goal, which is to settle and inherit the land and fill the land, and by filling the land, revealing Hashem in the world and making the world a dwelling place for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so with this we'll conclude, and you can have a few questions now. Yeah.
When Mashiach comes, when there's a young man, the Rebbe said when the Mashiach comes, there is a pashut of Eretz Israel b'kol ha'olam. Now, this pashut makes that all of the entire olam becomes Eretz Israel. The whole Adamah becomes...
Ultimately, the whole world, Eretz Yisrael was spread to encompass the whole world. And first, just like in the time of King David, that if Eretz Yisrael, its boundaries, its Torah-given boundaries were conquered properly, then any further land that is conquered becomes automatically holy in the holiness of Eretz Yisrael, becomes a part of Eretz Yisrael. And that's what will happen in the future, that the whole world will ultimately become Eretz Yisrael. Yes.
Rabbi, I'm having a little difficulty in your analogy between land and family. And number one, I live here in America, I'm not living there, I don't have that experience.
All right, so again, we said that you have to convey if you can't actually convey the land, you at least have to convey the love of the land. And do whatever you can here to experience and to support and to help the love of it, to be connected to the land.
What does the land represent, Rabbi?
The land represents our homeland, the place just like you would ask the question, what does the temple represent? The land of Israel is just like the whole world will ultimately become Israel, so all of Israel proper will ultimately be Yerushalayim, and all of Yerushalayim will be the Beis HaMikdash. The Beis HaMikdash is the place that divinity is revealed. In the same way, the land of Israel is the place that the Jewish soul can prosper. Just like there's a famous sefer which is called the Kuzari. Every Jew is intended to be a prophet. Very simple thing. Each and every one of us should actually be a prophet. God should directly connect and speak with us. That only happens in the land of Israel, as is discussed in Ba'arichun Sefer HaKuzari. So it means that no Jewish soul can come to its true fulfillment, which simply is to become a prophet, a Navi. You can only be a Navi if you're in Israel. 1 second. Yeah.
One little one is, could you ask something about the concept of keyboard, the union of two equals between...
Once more, I didn't get it.
Could you ask something about the concept of keyboard as a union of equals in terms of God and Bnei Israel? And then also wondering, which is similar to what you were talking about, is it possible to have a real internal balance if you live in Fruit Florida? Or is it not really possible?
A chibur at the level of the love of God, we said that each one must obviously reflect all of them. We said that primarily the love of God is a kinyan-based love, not a mesirah, not a chibur, but obviously they must all have all. So the level of chibur would be best reflected by a statement which the Chazal say that when we become tzaddikim, which is one of the promises of the future, v'amech kulam tzaddikim, that the whole Jewish people will reach the level of tzaddikim, then it says that tzaddik gozer v'HaKadosh Baruch Hu mekayem. A tzaddik in relation to Hashem is called leman achai v're'ai, there's a verse. That we come like brothers, and as though we are brothers and equals with Hashem, that the tzaddik decrees, and that which the tzaddik pronounces and decrees, Hashem makes it come true. Just like in general Hashem decrees and things come true, tzaddikim also decree, also just like Hashem. It's as though they're partners with Hashem. Or the very famous concept that whoever says by a chulu, who keeps and remembers the day of Shabbos properly, becomes a shutaf im HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'masei breshit. He becomes a partner, as though an equal with the Creator in the process of creation. There are many stages that the soul becomes, as it were, a partner or an equal with God. A brother of God, not just sometimes the soul is called a son of God, sometimes the soul is called a servant, an eved, and sometimes it's called a brother, God's brother. Leman achai v're'ai. So that's the level of chibur. Now the second part I didn't catch exactly, but yeah.
I was wondering if it's really possible for us to fulfill, if we live in Fruit Florida, it's really possible for us to
all of the prayers all of the prayer book, just open up the prayer book, you will see that the vast majority of prayers are consciousness and asking a God to give us Israel, to be in Israel for Mashiach. It's all about the land of Israel. So just knowing what you're praying for is full of consciousness of the love of the land. Once, but the ultimate experience of the land is the temple. The Beis HaMikdash, which is a primary objective of the Jewish people, is part of Eretz Yisrael consciousness. It's the central part. There's a famous medrash that Abraham, when God promised Abraham the land of Israel, Abraham said that if you'll give me the Temple Mount, you gave me the land. But if you don't give me that, 500 by 500 amot, then the whole land is nothing. That's the heart of the land. But of course, heart by itself is also not enough. You have to have the whole body. There has to be the whole body of the land, all of the limbs of the land. And you have to know that the heart is the temple. And again, all of our prayers are all about this. So if you teach your children, for instance, a person has a child and teaches them to pray for the Beis HaMikdash, or tells them about the Beis HaMikdash, tells them about Eretz Yisrael, then you are conveying, once more, the continuity of the people, to what kept us going throughout 2,000 years of exile, the longing, the ga'aguim for Eretz Yisrael. In addition, obviously we were committed to the Torah, but still the thing that keeps us going is just like the thing that keeps us going is the faith in Mashiach, in the imminent coming of Mashiach. That has to do with Ahavat Eretz Yisrael. In a certain way, the messianic principle is more, as a love principle, is more a love of the land even than all of the other things. The love behind the faith that we have in Mashiach coming is actually primarily a love of the land of Israel and its ultimate destiny for us. That once more, that is the place that we will come to our true self-fulfillment, which is ultimately God's self-fulfillment, as it were. Yes. So the Or HaChaim, just in short, what he says is that if there isn't true love between people, they are not sufficiently, unconsciously, they're not sufficiently concerned enough one with the other to take the total effort to communicate one between the other. And he says that the problem was that Adam did not exactly communicate the fullness of God's command to him, to his wife Chava. That had he so done, he would have explained to her, it would have been very clear that there is a difference between touching the fruit and eating the fruit, which she wasn't so clear about. And the problem is because there was a communication problem, and a communication problem is a love problem. Once more, you have to look in the Or HaChaim. He explains that the problem between Adam and Eve was a communication problem, and all communication problems between spouses are due to a love problem. Yeah.
You spoke about the critical nature of the love of land for our present times. And I'm just wondering if there is this spirit of love between brothers that's fundamentally based on a lack of true appreciation for the land because of the difficulties in the relationship with the father or with themselves. So what's the remedy? Sometimes it seems that the only remedy is when you come to the last critical moment and you realize you might lose it.
Okay.
And then you finally come to the essence.
There's a famous statement that just knowing the problem, knowing the disease, is a half of the remedy. So just the very consciousness that we are trying to understand it, that's already the beginning of the remedy. Yes. Yeah. in other words, what you're trying, obviously here in our chart here, a husband and wife are chesed and gvura. But it's true that if a marriage is not based, I mean, just simply, for instance, if a marriage is not based upon having children, so it's going to break apart. It won't have any continuity to it. It's not al pi Torah. If the purpose of marriage is just for gratification of impulses and urges, and it's not for the basis of performing the commandment of having children, then actually it's light, then there's no hold in the marriage. There's no, what does hold mean? No, hold means acknowledging the purpose. So if there is not a true acknowledgement of the purpose of marriage in the marriage, then obviously the marriage will not be able to exist. So that definitely is a hold problem in the marriage. It is not clear what the marriage is for. It's not clear what is the direction of the marriage. In addition, here we're just talking about the love involved. That's what the Kuzari said, and that's the same Kuzari as we said before, that Eretz Yisrael has to do with prophecy. That's the place that the Jewish people reaches its fulfillment, and that has to do with Lashon HaKodesh.
And Lashon HaKodesh, it seems to me that the Lashon HaKodesh is the way that we connect.
And that's a good idea. It's a very good idea that he said that because they're related. And learn, people say what you can do in exile, in relation to the love of the land of Israel, that's mastering the Hebrew language. That's a very, very important thing. The Hebrew language itself is the basic link of the soul to the land. Not just learning Torah, but speaking Hebrew. That's a very good point.
I have another question with this lady here. You said that the causes of communication problems is an example of a love problem. Would you give me an example of a love problem that causes communication?
That's the Orach Chaim. That was the problem in the Garden of Eden between Adam and Eve.
But you said the reason there's a communication problem is that there's a love problem.
Again, that's what he explains there. That there was a lack of true love, and that it reflected itself in a communication problem.
What is true love, Rabbi?
It's a good question. That's for next class. Seria. Marriage without the will of having children. It's up to God to give children, of course. Right. So spiritually, even if they're not physical children, every union produces spiritual children, as taught in Kabbalah. And through every union, which again is children-minded, so thoughts of tshuva or souls of converts are given birth through every union of husband and wife. Yes.
Nowadays, what would be the drawing forward of the breakup of relationships between man and wife in the community? Also, what would you say would be an answer, a suggestion how to mend it and how to be divorced? Better how to prevent it also.
So once more, the marriage has to be based upon purpose. There has to be common purpose behind the marriage, and that's what is lacking nowadays. Again, the problem of marriage and what's going on in our modern community, that demands a whole talk by itself. Yeah. Okay, so I'll try to just in very, very short answer your question, answer this gentleman's question a little bit at the same time. The basic problem between all, and also maybe your question as well, what is love? There's a very famous statement in the Gemara that says that under the chuppah, under the canopy, the wedding canopy, the groom was addressed. There was a custom in Israel, in the land of Israel, to ask the groom, matzah or motzeh, did you find her, or are you finding her? What did that question imply? There are two verses. One verse says in Proverbs, matzah isha matzah tov, he found the woman and he found goodness. And there's another verse in Ecclesiastics in Kohelet that says, umotzeh ani mar mimavet taisha, and I find more bitter than death a woman. So one asks the groom, what type of finding is involved here? Have you found her, or are you finding her? Have you found her in the past implies the good verse, which is matzah isha matzah tov. Are you finding her in the present implies the bad finding, which is motzeh ani mar mimavet taisha. So what does that mean? So the one way that this is explained in the Kabbalah and Chassidut is that the simple thing is that finding in the past here implies going back to the primordial common soul root between the two. So when you ask, say, why a marriage breaks up, it's because there is only finding, there's temporal finding in the present, but there was no finding in the origin of the souls. One has not actually found his original soulmate, his true beshert, but it's just finding some temporal love, apparent, external love-based relation. But the deeper meaning, even than this, once more, the simple meaning is that matzah means that you found in the source, and motzeh means that you haven't found in the source, you're just finding now at the temporal, mundane, superficial level of reality. And that marriage will turn into a bitter marriage, more bitter than death, and obviously you'll want to sever that relationship. The deeper meaning is that the word in the positive verse, which reads matzah isha matzah tov, the expression is matzah isha, he found the woman, he found her. And there's no word in between the finding and the true object which is found, which is the woman, his soulmate. In the other verse, it reads like this. It says, umotzeh ani mar mimavet et ha'isha. There's many, many words between the finding and the woman. It says, and find I more bitter than death, the woman. So what does that mean? It actually is saying, umotzeh ani, that I'm finding myself. I didn't find the woman at all. I think that I've fallen in love with a woman and marrying a woman, but actually it's purely a psychological search for self-gratification. I just found myself. I married myself. It's a self-worship based relationship. And if that's the case, if a person is marrying himself, then the marriage degenerates into one which is more bitter than death. So what does it mean? It means that the problem nowadays is that everything is just looking for yourself. That even though once more you think that this is a nice girl or a nice boy to marry, but you're just looking out for your own gratification. Of course, this can be more subtle or more overt. It can be pure physical lust, or it can be much deeper psychological levels that one is seeking self-gratification. And what the verse is saying is that if you're seeking any form of self-gratification in marriage, if that is the motivation, then that degenerates into more bitter than death, and ends with divorce. Chas v'shalom. But if you're just finding her, that any true relationship is giving oneself over. Just before we said that the giving motivation or principle behind love is that there's a giver and a receiver. One thing that we didn't say, which we can What I'll add is that the true giving is not just giving something else, giving the kiddushin, giving the ring, or giving parnasah, bringing sustenance and parnasah into the house. The true gift is always giving of oneself, of really giving of oneself to the other. And if the giving is giving of oneself, then the bond will be true and will be lasting. If it's an external gift in order just to receive self-gratification at one level or another, then it will degenerate. And that's the problem of nowadays. And so even in relation to Adam and Eve, as was asked, what was the problem with Adam and Eve? So even Adam and Eve, it says that there was an ego problem there. Because every problem always begins with an ego problem. There's always some ego in the way between two people. So whenever you say, why in this generation is so much divorce, the general answer to all such questions is that it's an ego problem. That's always what stands in the way between two souls being able to relate and to love and to unite with one another.
In regard to the current situation in Israel now, isn't there a conflict between love of Israel and love of the land?
Love of the people, you mean? Love of the...
It seems to me that some people, they care more about the land than more about Israel itself.
It's definitely that there are some souls which are more people-oriented than land. For instance, even let's say that there is the way of Chabad Chassidut. Now, Chabad Chassidut, we know that the Rabbi was tremendously convinced and emphasizing the love of the land and the necessity to keep the whole land of Israel, not chas v'shalom to give away any smallest part of Israel. On the other hand, he did not yet say for all of the Jewish people in the diaspora to immediately pack their bags and move to Israel. And his own Hasidim, he told that the first and foremost responsibility is to the people in the diaspora. And you can't, just like a captain of a ship can't leave the ship until the whole ship is saved, so can the Hasidic community is not able to just pack its bags and go to Israel until it has succeeded in saving the whole Jewish community of the diaspora. So that's an example that both are there. What am I trying to say? That if people sometimes think that one is at the expense of the other, that's a total mistake. That means that something is perverted. The truth is that they both are there, and nonetheless, often there has to be an emphasis of one in relation to the other. So for instance, those people that say that number one mitzvah in this generation is immediately for everybody to move to Israel, like say Merkaz Harav or other groups, that the one first responsibility of every Jew is right now you move tomorrow, get on the first plane tomorrow to Israel. And if you don't do it, there's something wrong. You're a bad Jew, chas v'shalom. So there is such a philosophy, and that obviously puts the love of the land first before every other consideration. There's another philosophy that says that loves the land just as much and is just as forceful, and maybe sometimes even more forceful of not chas v'shalom giving any land away at any expense whatsoever, and at the same time, nonetheless, emphasizes first the love of the people, because first you have to have the people. First you have to save the people. Which means that the Jewish people has to be protected and saved in all of the world. And that is the shita of the Rabbi in Chassidut.
In this regard, right now in Israel,
Yes.
this peace process, or so-called peace process, it's like, it seems to me that either the people are sticking together and we love all Israel as they are and we go with this peace process, or there's going to be, people will be divided and then we have no country and no people.
All right, but the peace process is a fraud. Again, this is not intended to be the topic now, but it's clear that the peace process is an illusion.
Yeah, but
So
what's
it's
going to happen to the people?
all right. So that's our responsibility: is to open up the eyes of the people to see the truth. We're in a difficult, very difficult situation. Obviously, the people, nothing can be at the expense of losing one soul. All the souls must be together. And the peoples are always the first consideration, because you can't have the land without the people. But if there is some even demonic force which is perverting the mind of a large percentage of the people, so we have to pray to God and we have to do whatever we can to enlighten the people. Just like here, you say, Shaliach of Chabad and Chutzars, without this consideration of the peace process. Peace process is eating away at the people, and the assimilation in America is eating away at the people. The peace process is not the only problem of the Jewish people. There are other problems of the Jewish people besides the peace process. They're interrelated. It's clear that the peace process in Israel and assimilation in America are interrelated problems. They're definitely one and the same, just two different sides of the coin. The way that in Israel assimilation is done is called the peace process. And here in America it's assimilation, it's intermarriage. There's two different manifestations of one problem, but again, what is a person is responsible for the Jewish people, so he's trying to fight these diseases, these spiritual diseases in every front. So there's one front which is called assimilation in America, there's another front which is the peace process, quote unquote, in Israel, and there are other great problems that we have to try to both to pray and to do whatever we can to stop these problems. First of all, to enlighten them. Just like assimilation, you can't fight assimilation without tshuva. So the very same thing is true of the peace process. You can't fight the peace process without the people doing tshuva. So the only thing that is necessary is to inspire and enlighten the people to do tshuva. There's no other way to deal with it. You can't fight it by just explaining that it's wrong. That's not going to work. You have to go to the root of the problem, which is the spiritual consciousness of the people. Maybe we'll continue the questions sitting down.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Ginzburg. I'm sure everybody enjoyed it this evening. Thank everybody for coming. Lincoln Square Synagogue, Chabad of the Upper West Side, co-sponsors. Everybody can continue their involvement with Rabbi.